Good morning to everybody. And before kind of beginning the homily, actually, I'm grateful. One of you came up to me right before Mass and said, "Father, please mention Venezuela." And I'm glad you reminded me, because otherwise I would have slipped my mind. The reality is, I was just having dinner with a Venezuelan couple last night. I didn't realize the numbers, because they've only, I think, a couple hundred people that they've discovered that are dead. But I didn't realize the numbers we're looking at. If the number that she cited was correct, it was 40,000 missing. And they were telling me, look, there were video footage of buildings. This is not like a farmer's barn or something collapsing, but like 20-story buildings, 30-story buildings, just completely coming down a la Twin Towers with people inside them. So those people are going to badly need our prayers. The parish. I need to get the details down, I'm sorry. I know the parish, the Archbishop is asking, and actually all the Archbishops are asking us just to work with the ordinary channels because they're well set up, not Catholic Charities, but Caritas International. And so I believe in the parish bulletin. I'm sorry I don't have the details, but I think it would be worth looking into how we can all help and get behind this cause. And if nothing else, minimum, even if sometimes it's hard to move a larger organization because it takes a certain while to get our momentum going, but if nothing else, maybe on our own spontaneous we can organize rosaries or something. I would very much encourage that, and certainly as a second intention for this Mass, I would ask everyone to remember this intention. Finally, when I was reading or listening to the first readings, it's the Book of Lamentations, but I was mentally applying it to the disaster in Venezuela, and I think it would be very applicable. So maybe in your own prayers you can take that today's first reading and just think about that situation as you're reading and praying. So, and now on to a completely different homily. So, I wanted to focus on kind of the star of the gospel, which is the centurion. This is one of two times in the gospel where Jesus is, quote unquote, amazed. This is the positive one. The other one is a negative one. The positive one is with the centurion, this pagan guy, reveals a faith that no Jew apparently had revealed up until the point, barring John the Baptist and the Blessed Virgin Mary and St. Joseph and a couple other. You understand that those people are a different category, but so it's not a literal statement, but yeah, Christ was amazed at the faith of this man. The other time that he was amazed was actually at the disbelief of the people of Nazareth when he went home and preached. So I think there's a couple of basic principles here. Number one, there's an expression that Thomas Aquinas refers to frequently, is that grace builds on nature. What's that mean? If the human foundation, the human virtues are not in place, God's grace doesn't have a whole lot to work with. Okay? That's number one. But the second thing, which is kind of a counter principle, and the two of these are working together, is that faith is a gift. It is a gift. It comes from God. Grace is a gift. Faith is a gift. All these things are gifts. But that we have to be receptive to them. And if we're not receptive, the grace kind of bounces off, the faith kind of bounces off, it doesn't penetrate and doesn't change us. But we see in the centurion a man who is radically open to the gift of faith. And this, I think, is what amazed Jesus so much, is how did this guy get to be so open to the grace of God coming from his background? So, first of all, what is a centurion? Centurions, we know the Roman soldiers, it just means that he was in charge of 100 people. But the centurions were considered to be the backbone of the Roman army. What made the Roman military great? I'm sure they had great generals and good technology, but really people consider it was the centurions were what made the Roman army the Roman army. The centurions were picked from the best men that they had. And they weren't necessarily great tacticians or strategists, but they were great leaders of men. You didn't get to be a centurion unless you were somebody who had been there and done that. You are a person who is able to lead other men because you have shown in your own life as a soldier that you've got, quote unquote, the right stuff. You are, somebody that they can count on, somebody who will be the first one to lead the charge, somebody who will be there for the men. So he's a man of whenever you see a centurion in the gospel, know that at least from a human perspective, if not morally, spiritually, at least from a human perspective, this is a solid guy. You think about American military, we see a lot of that too. You see some of these vets, barring some of the ones in the front pew. But you see you think about special forces guys or Marines or whatever. Like if a guy who's been a Marine walks into an elevator, you know it. He can be dressed up the same as everybody else, but there's a presence, okay? Because there's human virtue there. So that human virtue creates a foundation for God to build on. But this man is also radically humble. First of all, in the Gospel of Luke, the different gospel, we know that this centurion built the synagogue for the Jewish people. So he is somebody he's a good man. He sees the Jewish people. Imagine this. You are a military leader of a superpower occupying a very pesty and annoying little country called Israel. Okay? But this man seemed to have a compassionate heart. He cared for the Jewish people. He cared for his Jewish servant. He went out of his way for this Jewish servant. He spent his own money to build the synagogue, which was quite an impressive structure, actually. I've been to Capernaum. Actually, the one we see was not the one that was in existence when Jesus was there, but the foundation is still there. It was not a small undertaking to pay for that out of your own pocket for a religion that you don't even belong to. That's a big deal, okay? And he approaches Jesus. Imagine this. It would be understandable if an occupying man from a superpower who is better educated than all the people around him, who, has Roman culture, Roman language, Roman money, all that. It would be understandable if this guy had a big head and was proud and lorded it over people. He turns to Jesus and he calls him Lord. Can you imagine that? Jesus, who is a poor itinerant preacher, street preacher, basically. I mean, that's from his perspective. He somehow has the faith and humility to call Jesus Lord. How does he get to that point? That's where the grace of God comes in, because ultimately, for all that this man was humble and everything, I think to arrive to that degree of faith, that can only be God's grace, right? He is a man who understands authority. When he addresses Jesus, he's saying, look, I know what authority is. I am under authority and I have authority over other men. And when I say jump, they say how high, right? And I believe that you have spiritual authority. I know. I don't need to be there. I don't need you to come to my house. I'm not, and he actually uses the words, I'm not even worthy. Again, think of the humility of this man. You are an occupying, important figure of a superpower in some backwater town in a backwater country, and you say, I'm not worthy to have you enter under my roof. And he says, I know that you have spiritual authority. It's enough for you just to tell me right now, and I will believe. This is the incredible faith, incredible virtue of this man. Now, how did he get to that point? I can only believe, because Capernaum was kind of Jesus' unofficial headquarters. This is where he spent more time than any other place, the Capernaum and the surroundings. I can only believe that this man, first of all, you're essentially the local power, the local boss man, for want. I don't know if he had an official title other than centurion, but for all practical purposes, he was the boss man. At least he was the police chief. He's an important figure. Capernaum wasn't that big. It was an important town, but it wasn't that big. So I think he knew all the figures. He would have known Peter and Andrew and James and John, for example. He knew some of these family members. He knew some of Jesus' disciples or followers. He knew the crowds. He knew who was good, who was bad. And I'm sure he would have heard Jesus' preaching, and I'm sure he would have been amazed and said, who is this man who speaks the truth like this? I have never heard anybody speak like this before. And then he starts hearing about and maybe even seeing and witnessing miracles. So this is preparing the ground for this incredible moment of faith and humility in which the centurion approaches Jesus and says, Lord, I'm not even worthy to have you under my roof, but I beg you, come and cure my servant. And Jesus, who had made it clear earlier on, my mission is, first of all, to preach to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I'm not going to mess around with Samaria, although he did. I'm not going to go outside of Israel. But when a person comes to him with this, like this, Jesus recognizes my Father is there. The finger of God is there. There's no way. And therefore, God is creating this encounter as an anticipation of what my church is going to do for the Gentiles. So, how do we tie all this together aside from just praising the centurion? Well, I think in our own lives, first of all, we need to recognize that a lot of times the people that are outside of this church building, our family members, those who are maybe even engaged in sin or whatever, a lot of times there's an openness. We ask why are so many young adults converting to Catholicism, and a lot of the others are converting to Orthodoxy because they're seeing something solid there, right? Well, that also shows there's an openness and a hunger there, and we shouldn't just discount that. We need to recognize that and work with it. That's number one. And number two, if we want God to work in our lives this way, well, just like the centurion, how humble are we? How much skin do I put in the game? He spent his own money to build a synagogue. He humbled himself before Jesus. He could have sent servants, he could have done anything, but he goes to Jesus personally. He takes personal care of his servant. How much skin am I willing to have in the game? How much am I willing to step outside of my own comfort zone? If we're not willing to step out of our comfort zones, don't be surprised if we don't get holy. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.